Wabash Carnegie Public Library Oral History Program, interviewing Augie Rumpf at his home, Wabash, Indiana, November 15th, 1972, Wednesday evening. Augie, the first thing I'm going to ask you is to give me your full name, and then give me your mother and her maiden name, what was her maiden name, and your father's full name.
My full name is August Jacob Rumpf, and my father's name was Daniel Rumpf, and my mother's name was Mary Rumpf, and her maiden name was Benjus, B-E-N-J-U-S.
Augie, what day, or what date I should say, were you born, and where were you born?
I was born St. Patrick's Day, March the 17th, 1903, on Manchester Avenue in Wabash, Indiana.
Well, that this year, then coming up, you would be exactly 70 years old. Is that right? Coming up, yeah. What did your father do, Og?
He was a stonemason. He did a lot of work around Wabash, all the printing, the stonework on the Wabash Carnegie Library, the large fluted columns, the printing. That was all done by my dad.
Well, this is most interesting because I don't think the library even knows that, do they? That your dad did the work on the library. Here we are working on the library project, and your dad had done the stonework. And when they were remodeling the library, they were looking for the drawings and everything, you know, which are gone. The original library drawings are gone. Did he and your mother live to a fairly ripe old age, Og? And how old were they when they passed on?
Dad died when he was 69, and Mother was 82.
How did they happen to come to Wabash?
They both came from the old country, from Germany. Mother came from East Prussia, and Dad came from the Rhine River Valley, and they met in Chicago and were married in Chicago.
And he was a stonemason then all his life?
Yes, he learned the trade. Dad learned the stonemason trade over in the old country.
How many brothers and sisters did you have?
Had 4 brothers and 1 sister.
Og, where did you go to grade school and high school, and give me some of your early remembrances of grade school and high school, and names of teachers and things that you can remember, and kids you played with?
I started in the grade school up at the old Century building on Manchester Avenue, and I went up there through the first 4 grades, and then I was transferred to the East Ward, and I finished the grade schools up there. Then I went to high school for 2 years, and I quit there and went out to Kansas to my brother's, and went to school and worked out there for 2 years.
What part of Kansas, and why did you happen to go out there?
I had my oldest brother, Dan, was out there working for the Santa Fe, and he talked me into coming out there, and I was taking up drafting in aero plants, work on locomotives, and I worked out there. Worked in the daytime and went to school at night, 4 nights a week, and I stuck with it for 2 years, and I got homesick and came back to Wabash.
Did you get your high school diploma?
No, I didn't.
What did you do then when you got back to Wabash? That must have been around 19...
That was 1924, and naturally, when I came back, I was looking for a job, and I went by the old Honeywell building thinking that I would try and get a job down at Honeywell's, and somebody told me that that was in October in 1924, I think it was, and they had had a pretty disastrous fire there, and I said, well, it looks like I won't do much good to try and get a job there because they were just cleaning up. And I put my application in there, and a short time later then, they called me to go to work down there.
Who was the personnel man, or what procedure did you use in those days?
I think the superintendent at that time was Kenneth Roby, and Harold Rodebaugh was down there at that time, but I think Kenneth Roby was the superintendent of the plant at that time, as I recall.
Did you you started to work then in 1924, and what was your first job, and what kind of wages did you get?
Well, I think that I worked for Harold Rodebaugh, and I worked in the machine shop, and that's where I applied for that kind of work because that was what I really preferred. And I think my wages at that time was about, I think the weekly wage was about $15 or $16 a week.
You had no formal training in machine work, did you?
Just outside of the work that I had at the Santa Fe railroad shops.
And what did you work on specifically in the machine shop then?
Well, I originally started out on hand screw machines, and I worked at that most of the time. And then during the war, when help was hard to get and a lot of the boys had gone into service and they put on 3 shifts, why, I made the setups for the more inexperienced help on the night trick.
In other words, you worked on this hand screw machine from the time you started until, you'd say, 1940.
Yes.
16 years on that one particular job.
That's right.
Did you see any changes evolve there at Honeywell in those 16 years?
You mean...
inside the shop, or anything going on, or any particular interesting projects?
Well, there was always some changes. Of course, different line of products that they were bringing in and shipping out, and they were expanding all the time. The employment rate was increasing all the time, and like any industry, in order to go in progress, you have to show differences. You had to keep up with the times.
But all those 16 years, you were still staying on the same machine, though.
Well, the same type of machine, not exactly on the same machine, but the same type of machine. They had a lot of these machines there, and of course sometimes machine would be down for something, and then they'd switch over onto another machine or another job.
Were you familiar with what the end product was that they were making at that time?
Yes, we worked on all the different, they had humidistats and thermostats and astrostats and aquastats. At that time it was mostly temperature controls was their big product at that time, and we did the work on all of them, so it was a varied line, and usually you would go and get acquainted with the part and try and know where the part went, and that way you'd have a little idea of what it had to do and what tolerances you could go and take on the job.
Well, 1940 came on, and they started expanding for war production. What did you do then you were setup man on the night trick?
Well, of course, one of the big changes was 1927 when they merged with Minneapolis. That was their biggest competitor, and they merged with Minneapolis, made Minneapolis Honeywell in 1927. And then along came the war, and help was hard to get. They lost a lot of the boys to the service, and they got this telescope job. That was when Rommel was over North Africa during the World War, and he had the American forces on the run, and they needed these telescopes to put on their tanks over there, and they were in critical condition, the American forces were, and so Honeywell's got the contract for this telescope to put on their tanks, and it was a very important step. They worked night and days, Sundays, holidays, and they did a very good job. And after they got those scopes over on these tanks, why, they turned the matters around and got Rommel on the run, and that was the important thing of the war over there in northern Africa.
Did they have any security at the plant during those days, Og?
Yes, we had guards on every shift. They weren't too accurate on that, especially on the night shift. They were a little bit more careful than they were on the day shift.
I guess they figured if anybody was going to steal it, why, they'd come at night and wouldn't be so brazen to come in the daytime.
Right.
Now, what happened then after the war ended?
Well, for about 3 years, work was a little scarce, and I was the last single man to be laid off for a period of years then. For about a year and a half, I was off a year and a half. That was about 1940, and that was right before the war. And of course, when the war came back, why, help was hard to get. And they called me back to work, and then I worked up until 1965 when I took early retirement.
You were actually laid off for a year and a half then?
Yes.
What did you do during that year and a half?
I didn't do anything for a while, then I got this shell filling station where fishbacks are located now, and I ran that for a year and a half until I was called back at the Honeywell plant.
Then you just continued to do what until you retired in 65? What job did you have?
Well, I was on inspection for a while, but about 75% of the time I was on machine work, which is what I liked best.
So you would say basically then from 1924 to 1965 with a year and a half layoff, you did basically nothing but machine work. Who were some of the supervisors over that machine? Would you call it the machine shop? Is that what you call it? Who were some of the supervisors over the years?
Well, I think when I started, the first superintendent, I think, was Kenny Roby. And then we had Dan Beamer, who later went over to the Wayne Tank Company over to Fort Wayne. And we had Paul Shivers and Harry Kuntz, Mount Smith, and I think that was
Mosworth would have been in there.
Yes, Jim House, Mosworth, and
then you get into the Freeport.
yes, yes.
What was your impression of generally the supervision of employees and so forth at Honeywell over the years?
Well, I got along with all of them real well. I tell you, if you like your work, the person asked me and said, "Well, Augie, did you like to work at Honeywell?" I said, "Well, I don't know. After working there 37 years, if I didn't like it, I don't know. It'd just be about like going to prison. I don't know of anything that would be more unfortunate than a person working 37 years on a job that he didn't enjoy."
What was the first time that you ever met Mr. Honeywell?
Well, I knew Mr. Honeywell, I think, before I started to work down there when I was just a youngster. But to meet him personally, he'd come in through the shop, and he knew the score, and he got acquainted with a lot of his employees personally, and I think that the employees enjoyed it, and I think that he appreciated getting acquainted personally with his employees. I think you'd put out more for him that way. And I know when I was working nights, Fred Ellis and I, we worked nights for 2 summers, just the two of us down there in the machine shop. And Mr. Honeywell would come down of an evening sometime 9 or 10 o'clock at night and pull a stool up and sit and watch me work. And he'd sit down there sometime till for half an hour and watch me work. Then he'd go up to the office and go to work. He said he could get more work done, concentrate better when the phone wasn't ringing and no noise around there to disturb him. And lots of times at midnight he'd still be up there working in the office.
Did you ever see Mr. Honeywell get mad?
Yes, I think I have.
What happened?
Well, I don't recall. He never got mad at anything that I'd done, but I know if things weren't going right, why, you could tell that he, like anybody, he'd show his temper in different ways.
You don't remember any specific instances? Where somebody took his parking place used to be one of the things that it...
Well, I know one, no, that was Mr. Shivers that got mad one time, and he showed his temper. But I don't know of any certain time when this happened.
You ever see Mr. Honeywell get a particular amount of enjoyment out of any particular incident?
He seemed to enjoy mixing with his employees. I remember we used to have our annual Christmas banquets down at the Honeywell Center, and he would always supervise the setting up of the tables and chairs. And he was a perfectionist. Whenever he wanted to do anything, it had to be done to perfection. And I can see him now. He'd get down on his knees and line up the bench, and he'd say, "Yeah, move that back table over there about 1.5 inches." And that's just how everything had to be, just perfect.
Did Mr. Honeywell ever bring anything into the machine shop for you to work on?
Yes, when they were building the center down there, he had a lot of ornaments on his that they used on the chandeliers and on the different parts of the building. And Louis Kroll and I we worked together quite a bit, and he had some of those articles that were made up down there at the shop, and we fellows would work on them.
What was the going back? What was the change that took place when Minneapolis and Honeywell merged? Did you notice any change?
Well, no, that was quite a story. I remember one program that Mr. Honeywell had on the, I think it was a Quarter Century Club. He was on the program that night, and he went through the whole procedure of this merger, about when it first started to sprout up, and he went through all the details, even to the signing of the agreement and everything. And that was a long, lengthy procedure and pretty complicated. You could imagine with all the money was involved, and but he went through everything, and it was real interesting.
Do you remember seeing any of the people from Minneapolis then going over the place? Or?
Yes, they came down there and went through the building. Of course, at the time, I don't suppose we realized what was going on until after it was the proceedings had started.
What was the relationship between the management and labor over the years? Well, let's start back when you started.
Well, of course, years back we didn't have the labor unions like we have now, and then a little later on they started organizing, and we started up our own little shop union. The dues were, I don't know, $3 or $4 a year, and we got along very well with management, because our contract usually came after the Minneapolis Honeywell had been signed, and we usually fell in line right with their contract. So it didn't cost us a great deal. And of course, then when the employment got expanded, and that was when the older folks, the old hands, were all down there, and we got along pretty well together. But then when the younger generation got in there, where they said, well, I think we ought to join one of the big unions. And of course, it came up to a vote, and the majority won. And the old-timers were the minority at that time, so they joined the large union.
Were you on any of the union organizing committees or anything for the company union?
Yes, I was one of the officers on our independent union for a number of years.
I just talked to Howard Smith, and we discussed the company union. And were you as knowledgeable as Howard was in the formation of the union, or were you asked by Howard or one or two of the others?
No, I think Howard was more active in it than I was.
Then you weren't approached directly from the management. You were approached from another factory worker like yourself.
Yes, well, naturally we had our meetings and such as that, but I was never, I just wasn't the type to be real active in it.
Did you think it filled the need?
I think it filled the need very well. I think that we got along exceptionally well. But like I say, after things got organized and these unions got to be more active, why, they didn't think it was adequate enough that we should go into a larger union.
Did things change then when you got into the big union, into the national or the international union?
Yes, I think that there's a little more. I don't think that the organization was well, it just had more of a chance. More grievances would come up, and it caused a little more trouble than what the old organization did.
What do you think Honeywell image was in the community over the years?
Well, of course, like anybody, the prestige that he had in our community, a lot of persons didn't like him, didn't like the family, but I think it was more a case of jealousy. He started out from scratch, and he built the organization up to when they merged, two of the largest companies in the world in that kind of business. And now I understand they've got over 100,000 employees throughout the world. And I think that he's a wonderful man as far as I was concerned.
He must have done something right.
Yes.
Of course, you always find someone that's ready to detract from someone else's success in the building. When you started to work, which plant were you in?
We started down on the Canal Street plant. They expanded. They had a plant during the war at their peak when they had over 1,000 employees. They had one down on South Miami Street, and they had the ones over at the old cabinet plant on Wabash Street.
Do you remember when they made the move out to Bond Street?
Yes.
Were you still working then?
Yes.
Were there any rumors or anything in the factory relative to that move?
Well, like I say, I had worked for them 37 years, and everybody said, well, Honeywell's on the way out. But when they built a new plant out there at Bond Street, I think some of them gave up and said, well, they're not going to invest that much money if they're going to move out of town.
Did you feel like you were always adequately paid?
They always treated me very well. I don't have any regrets. If I had my life to live over again, and I'd do some things different, naturally. But I still think I was pretty fortunate. I've enjoyed the work, enjoyed the fellows I worked with, and I think Honeywell's treated me real well.
Did you work all through the Depression, though?
No. Of course, during the Depression, most everybody was, maybe 2 or 3 days a week. They were on a short-term week. And then Mr. Honeywell took a lot of his employees. That's when he built the Honeywell Gardens. He took them out there to keep them on the payroll.
Did you go out there?
No, I didn't.
Did the employees that worked, did they have any kind of a relief fund for the ones that weren't working that you knew of?
I don't recall. I know Mr. Honeywell spent a lot of money on his employees, and not only the ones, his employees that were in need, but he spent a lot of money on groceries that people were in need of that the public never knew of, that he didn't get any credit for.
Do you remember when he built the Honeywell Center?
Yes.
Did you have anything to do with that other than the reference you made earlier to the machine shop?
No, no.
The quarter-century meetings. And how about the organization that you had back in those days? Were you active in that and go to the parties? For employees, they had an employees group that used to have dances and so forth.
Oh, we had our parties, we had our Christmas parties, and we always had our athletic teams, baseball teams, and we had some good ones. And we had our annual picnics, and I always took a pretty active part in because naturally I liked the people I worked with. If I didn't like them, I wouldn't have been with them as long as I was.
I think that's great. How about your pension, Og? You feel that everything has worked to your satisfaction and so forth?
Well, of course, my pension, when I had that break in service there of about a year and a half or 2 years, which broke my continuous length of service, which cost me in the pension fund. But since then, now they've increased our pension fund, applied it onto the retirees, the same as persons that are presently employed with the company. So I'm very fortunate there because it amounted to just about double to what we'd been getting previous to that.
Do you find with Social Security and your pension that everything works fairly well?
I don't have any kicks. Work out the gardens and enjoy that out there. I go fishing a lot. I got a nice yard here. I enjoy working out here, and I'm very, very fortunate.
I'm going back and ask you a couple other questions. When you were a young man, I ask everybody the same question. Were you acquainted with the Ku Klux Klan?
No, I remember when that was down there, and I know there was a lot of comment down there, but I never took any stock in it, and I didn't really have much use for anybody that did have any stock in it.
Were they still recruiting members, or they were trying to get you to join?
Oh yes, well I was approached by quite a few of them, but I thumbs down on all of them.
They approached you right at work there, and
yeah.
Was there any threat that you wouldn't keep your job or something if you didn't join?
No, don't think it went to that extent. No.
Do you remember the time that Landon came to Wabash, Alf Landon?
Yes. I think that he came up on the train, wasn't it? Yes, I remember that.
Yeah. Anything unusual happen at Honeywell?
No, I know that we did a lot of ribbing with each other. If we didn't have the Landon button on, naturally it was politic. But nobody got hurt.
Yeah. Did they have a walk up to the train station? Do you remember?
Yes, they had quite a delegation from the plant there. I don't suppose it was all Republicans or all Democrats.
But they all went, huh? Well, Jim Weiss told me the other day that he and his brother Forrest were the only two, along with the janitor who was to stay and watch the place, that didn't go. And I thought that was most interesting. Og, you have any other thoughts or anything about Honeywell or Honeywell's relation with the community or with the union? Or
Well, just a little incident that happened. will always remember it, and I think it's a little interesting on the Mr. Honeywell himself. He used to always come down to the plant. That was in his later years. About 9 o'clock in the morning, you go down and buy a Coke, dime Coke machine, and he'd stand there and drink the Coke about 9 o'clock in the morning. And I used to see him down there because I was working right close by there. And one morning he came down, he was drinking his Coke, and the girl from the office came down, and she reached in for a coin purse, fumbled around, and Mr. Honeywell said, don't you have a dime? She said, no, I thought I had a dime in this coin purse. He said, well, I'll buy your Coke for you this morning. So he got out a little coin purse. He always carried a little coin purse. And he put the dime in the Coke machine. She got her bottle of Coke, went upstairs. In about 3 or 4 minutes, 4 or 5 other girls came down. And none of them, they didn't have any dimes either. Mr. Honeywell said, did that girl go upstairs and tell all you girls that I was buying the Cokes for the office force this morning?
Well, that's typical, isn't it?
Yeah.
They were going to get a Coke out of them. Did you ever meet the first Mrs. Honeywell?
Yes, I met her, but I think that was just probably one of the Christmas parties.
And now that you work at the gardens, how did you happen to ease into that position out there?
Well, my hobby had been raising roses for the last 20, 25 years. And one day I was down to the Honeywell Center, and I think I was applying for my retirement fund, Social Security. And Mr. Quinn, I'd met Mr. Quinn, and he says, Augie, I understand you're quitting out the plant. And I said, yeah, they're moving my department out, and I just don't enjoy it anymore. He said, we need somebody out the gardens to take care of our roses out there. He says, I understand that it's one of your hobbies. How about coming out and helping us out? And I said, well, I'll consider it. And so I thought it over, and I said, well, I'll take a chance. And I've never regretted it because I enjoy it out there and meet a lot of people, and I think it's been good for me.
You alluded to the fact that when they moved out to Bond Street, you didn't enjoy the work as much?
No, see, they used to have quite a machine shop out there. In fact, it was one of the largest departments.
That's on Canal or at Bond?
Well, that was at Canal and out at Bond. And then they moved the whole machine department out. That is, the screw machines, the lathes, and everything. They moved all that out, and all they had was a punch presses and some drill presses, tapping machines, and such as that. And the automatic screw machines, they were all moved out. So that just about took care of all my kind of work that I was interested in.
Well, what did you do then?
Well, they shifted me around. And of course, at that time we had the government contract on these missiles. And I worked on those, but I couldn't get my heart in it. And if I work at something, I want to enjoy it. And I wasn't enjoying it, so I just said, I'll just take early retirement.
How old were you?
I was, well, that's been 7 years ago, so I was 62.
Do you remember when the group moved in from Freeport?
Yes.
What was your reaction then?
Well, just like you say, a lot of new faces, and I used to know everybody by their first name and where they lived and all about them, but it was a complete new family when they came in.
How about Moseworth? Getting transferred and everything else? Did you think that they were trying to break up the combination, or what?
Oh, I don't know. Mose was a victim of circumstances, I think, and I felt sorry for him. I think he was doing a good job down here, but things didn't fall in line as they would have, and I think he was a victim of circumstances. I think Mose was a good man.
You know, Jim Ebbinghaus is retiring this month.
Yes.
And Jim, of course, had some very responsible positions.
Yes.
How was your relationship with Jim?
Oh, I knew Jim when we were in the grocery business up on the avenue. I was about 16, 17 years old, and Jim used to come up and buy candy bars up there. And so I've known him ever since he was 6, 7 years old, and he likes to fish, and so do I, so we had a lot of things in common.
That's a great guy, and he's reached retirement age, and he's going to take it. Og, since this is history, we're going to put this in the library, in the state library, and maybe 100 years somebody will come along and read it. I'm going to ask you about your marriage. And you were married, and your wife's maiden name, and the circumstances and so forth, which are a rather tender and touching little story.
I know. Well, I married George Martin's daughter, Catherine, and we were only married a year and a half, 2 years, and I lost Catherine and the baby, and that was it, and I never remarried after that.
What year was it, Og, that you got married?
I was married in 1942, and Catherine passed away in 1944.
Well, then you got married, you were born 1903, you said, and
Yes.
so you got married rather late, 39.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you had made your home with your mother then up until this time?
Yes.
You mentioned the grocery business also.
Yes, there were 4 of us. We had a grocery up on Manchester Avenue. That's where Kenny Clark started out then. He started out, that was the first place Kenny Clark had. He bought that little building and where we had been. And we were up there about, I don't know how many years, the 4 of us. That was when Wabash was booming. Big 4 shops were still here. And the Relay Motors truck company was here. And Wabash was in good shape at that time, and we had a good business. Of course, we didn't have the chain stores here at that time. Mm-hmm. And then shortly after that, the chain stores started in, and the small independent grocerman, he was just out of luck.
How was your relation with Paul Shivers?
Paul was, he had one bad failing, and that was if he thought he was right and you'd try and give him, I got in arguments with him several times, and he'd just walk away and let you standing there. But that's one little story I had I was going to tell you about. It was funny, but Glenn Kester worked in the tool and die shop, and he was a good die man, one of the best, he and Bus Martin. And they had a new job coming up. It was a big die, punch press die, and they wanted to get it up to Minneapolis to try on this punch press. And so Glenn worked on this die for weeks. He finally got it done, and Paul Shivers loaded in the back of his Buick and drove up to Minneapolis to try it out. And it was an expensive die, and tolerances were very, very close. And when they took it up there and set it up and ran some samples on it, they measured the samples, why, there were quite a few tolerances were way off. Of course, it put Paul in a pretty embarrassing position. Up the big shots up there, waiting for this die and everything. He got pretty mad, and he sent a wire down to Kester, and he says, "Kess," he said, "you'd better get your eyes examined." He says, "You need glasses." And when he came back to Wabash about 10 days later, Glenn was wearing glasses. But it wasn't, we're all human, and Kess was a good tool and die man, and he just had a bad day, evidently, when he worked on those parts for that die, and he was a victim. But Paul didn't like it very well.
Did Mose, was he easy to work with, Mose Worth?
Yeah, Mose started out, when he went down to Purdue, why, he worked his summer months, vacation months, down at the plant. And the boy, he started in rubbing elbows with the employees down there, and everybody liked Mose. And then naturally, when he graduated from Purdue, why, he stepped in and got an executive job down at the plant.
Did you see much of Phil Magner, making all this development and so forth going on?
Yes, Phil was, he was a good man. He was, I still visit with Phil a lot. Phil speaks a little German, and I still can speak a little German, and we speak German together although I've forgotten most of it. But Phil was a good man. He was about like Mr. Honeywell was. He was a perfectionist. If he did anything, there wasn't any halfway about it. It had to be just right on the button.
Do you remember the time that they employed the glass blower?
No.
They were making these tubes of some kind for some process back in the 20s, and they had employed an Austrian glass blower by the name of Weiss. Art Schenkel told me the story. I thought perhaps you would have. Did you see much of Art the years you worked there?
Yes, Art was working up in a different department, but Art and I, we were both ball fans, and we'd see each other during the lunch hour or before in the morning and evening. And I visited with Art quite a bit. I just called him the other evening.
I interviewed Carl Schwab also, and Carl worked there for several years, and much longer than anyone else, I'm sure, has ever worked there in terms of age, not in number of years.
Well, during the war, help was hard to get. We lost a lot of the younger fellows going to the service, and I was just about the age where I was too old to go, but they said, well, I would have been deferred anyway because they needed some of the old hands to supervise and take care of the young, inexperienced help. But we had fellows down there working for us during the war that were 75 years old, and they'd stand right up alongside some of these young boys and do just as much work, and sometimes better work than the young fellows would do.
Carl told me that he saved all the money he made at Honeywell's in war bonds, and of course he subsequently spent it because he's 92 years old now. Yeah. Did you ever have an idea that Honeywell's would ever move?
No, just like I said, everybody would say, oh, why don't you quit Honeywell's and go over to Marion or Kokomo, because Honeywell would be moving out of here. I heard that for 40 years, and they're still here.
Did you follow the WAA or any of those groups back in the early days, Og, when you were a kid?
I crawled underneath that fence and got my hind end paddled several times by the cop. Yeah, I can remember down there in the old Carroll Street Park. In fact, Genny Jones, over to Marion now, his dad was manager of the old WAAs. And Glenn and I were good friends. And my folks, they were never much athletically inclined because they were the older generation. They thought it was all a bunch of spend money for that kind of, they thought it was nonsense, you know. And I wanted to see those games, and they wouldn't give me the money to go, so Glenn said, well, I'll tell you, Augie, I'll get you a water bucket. And they always had to have water boys at that time. And you get a water bucket and go over and fill the water bucket, and you walk in the gate with me, and you're the water boy. And that's how I got to see all the games.
Did you see some pretty good athletes back in those days?
Oh, boy. I think that, of course, football was a whole lot different than what it is now. But when they had old Billy Milner and, well, we had some good college players here. There was Fred Reno. He wasn't a college player, but we used to play Evanston Athletic Club. That was a millionaire outfit. And they had Jimmy Falcon. He was All-American. And they had a lot of good college athletes on that team. And Wabash usually play them right to a standstill. And then we had,
Showalter's active then?
Yeah. Mickey Earhart. Yarnell's. And Mickey Earhart, he was from Huntington. He was a Notre Dame player, and the other two Irishmen played up Notre Dame. They played down here. In fact, I think that I don't know whether Gus Duray played down here, but the fellow played with Gus.
Rockney?
No, the fellow that coached, was assistant coach for the Bears.
Anderson? Hunk Anderson?
No. He died a short time here, but he played down here. And, we had some great well, we had one of the best profession. We played the Canton Bulldogs, and I'm saying we, I mean the local organization here. But they had a wonderful football team, and they just played practically for the money of it, not for the money of it, for the pleasure of playing.
What do you think has been the greatest change in the number of years that you've lived? What particular thing, incident, invention? Well, let me ask you a few questions. How about the automobile? Did you remember when the automobile became popular?
Yes, like I said, when I delivered groceries back in 1921, we had old model Ford. I delivered groceries with it. And my goodness, what a change now. As beautiful they are. At that time you had to crack them, and you had to step on the gas to generate enough juice to go and get any headlights. When you come to a corner, you had to go and race the engine to see what there's. And when you go up a hill, if we'd go up Allen Street Hill here on high, we'd say, boy, that's a good engine.
Do you remember when radio became popular?
Yes, but I think the biggest thing was this television. My goodness, that just revolutionized entertainment of all kinds. Shows and everything. It just changed. That was the biggest change, I think.
Do you remember seeing your first television set?
Yes.
What was the occasion?
Well, I don't remember who it was. I remember the first radio set. Paul Baylor, a friend of mine, had an old earphone set. We'd go over there and pick up these stations. Isn't that wonderful? And then they got to television, and I remember the first time a person told me about television. This Italian, I think, was one of the first ones that got out. And I said, why, it's impossible to go and be playing a football game in New York City and get it over the air and show it on a box like that. I said, why, it's not possible. It's just taken for granted now.
Do you remember the first time you saw it?
Yes.
What was the occasion?
I don't know whose it was, but you shake your head. You can't believe it.
Has Wabash been a good town to live in, Oz?
Greatest little town in the state. I haven't traveled around the state much, but I've been around quite a few of them, and no place like it. The person says, Augie, how's come you don't go to Florida now? You're retired, and evidently you're not have to bother financially, which I'm not, thank the Lord. Got good health, apparently. And I said, what do I want to go to Florida for? I was born and raised here. All my friends are here. I can walk around the block and hi, hi, hi. I said, I go down there. There's thousands of people down there, and maybe you'd go a week without seeing anybody you know, unless you happen to settle in a group of Wabash people, which is done quite a bit now. But I said, all my friends are back here, and that's half a living.
Did you ever think about getting in politics?
No. I was approached a number of years back, said, Augie, why don't you do this? And I said, no, I don't want to get involved. I've got too many friends. That's one good way to lose them.
Yeah, that's true. Very true. Well, can you think of anything else that we ought to cover that should go in the record? Or?
Well, I might say one thing. Being as I'm out the gardens, and this recording is supposed to be refer back to the Honeywell plant and Mr. Honeywell. We're out there at the gardens now, and we're in a stage of making a lot of changes out there. And a lot of the shrubs and everything have served their purpose. They're diseased, and we're removing them, changing things. And we had a few old buildings out there that served their purpose. And we thought, well, we'll just tear them apart. It won't be much of a job to tear them down. But when we got involved in tearing them down, we found out that when Mr. Honeywell built something, he built it to stay. because he had reinforced steel in there, and a job that we thought would go and take 3 or 4 hours to tear down, it took all day. And when he built something, he built it to stay.
What do you, what's your reflection of Mr. Honeywell as a conservationist?
Well, I don't know. I know that when he must have enjoyed nature, because when he wouldn't have spent the time and the money building the gardens out there. He had the beautiful flowers. He had peacocks, pheasants out there. So he must have been a lover of nature. And in later years, I remember at that time, I knew he was interested in roses because he had a lot of roses out the garden. I asked him one day, I said, Mr. Honeywell, what about these roses? He said, well, Augie, he said, really, he said, I think that my wife is more interested in the flowers than I am. So I never got much information from him out of it, but he was a lover of nature and the outdoors, I think.
Certainly his gardens out here are certainly a testimony that he had a heck of a lot of foresight.
That's right.
In building that, and now that the community is able to enjoy these beautiful spruce and other things that take 30 and 40 years to enjoy.
I know that when I take these groups out, we had chartered buses from Cleveland, Cincinnati, and they'd say, well, how large a community is Wabash? I said, about 14,000. And they said, you don't know how fortunate that you are that you had a citizen here that had forethought enough to go and lay out these gardens, I says, and it's tax-free. It doesn't cost the taxpayer a cent, no charge to it. And they said, well, it really is something, because we live in a community a whole lot larger than this, and we don't have anything like this to brag about.
It is beautiful, there's no doubt about it. Well, I think we've pretty well covered the ground, don't you? Nothing else you'd like to say?
Well, no. I hope that when this is rerun, the person that will hear this voice, these little experiences that I've been able to go and tell you, that they'll appreciate it. I know I appreciate having George come up here and give me this privilege to go and relate some of my experiences over the past 37 years.
Well, I appreciate that, and this is George Dingledye conducting the interview.